So again, this is a response to what the company has put out on JetNet. We're going to go through some of the open items. The TAs are, the association's not going to dispute the TAs, although they haven't had time to go through the documents. So if we could get started here, let's start with the first open item on fleet service, which is recognition and scope. Gentlemen, if you could, let's talk about recognition and scope as an open item.
Yeah, on the fleet service recognition and scope, you've seen what the company posted. And what we're going to try to do for you today is tell you where the differences are. So between myself, Andre, and Mark, we'll speak about the fleet service. Our proposal for fleet service matches the company in identifying the 40 locations that we have today. The difference is our proposal on data signing asked to add 16 additional cities by name. And Andre, if you want to name those cities, we can do that. And on data signing, any city that has more than 56 mainline weekly departures would also come in-house, and that is an additional 3 or 4 cities. So that would be a total of close to 20 additional cities. The company's proposal in fleet service recognition and scope is that the 40 cities is all you get. They will not agree if one of those cities goes away that they'll replace it with a like station. And there is no growth under the company's proposal for future cities moving forward.
So the 16 additional cities, we'll start with Albuquerque, Nashville, Cleveland, Columbus, Detroit, El Paso, Honolulu, Washington Dulles, Houston, Indianapolis, Memphis, New Orleans, Fort Myers, Orange County, Tulsa, and Tucson. And again, we came to these conclusions by doing a calculation that captured a threshold. And that threshold would have been met by all of the cities that we named in association with the 40. So that's why we extended it out to capture more work. Pretty much that was either done by one or the other in the association, and through the elimination of bankruptcy, we still feel that these are viable locations.
In fleet service, the next open item is classifications and qualifications. And I will say in fleet service, if you'll look, Article 8 is intentionally left blank. That's because classifications and qualifications are combined in Article 7.
Yeah, and in the fleet service, classifications and qualifications under the association's proposal, that is tied to the recognition and scope, where it refers to this work in classifications that's coming within the jurisdiction of the scope article. The big differences in these proposals are the company wants to have a limited number of locations do specific work that we do today. And the association's proposal is what we call a snapshot theory. And we want to capture everything we're doing today, even if it's when and where so directed. So for an example, our proposal is that we perform all of the normal customary transportation of luggage. The company in their proposal, you'll see that they added one word, mainline. And their position at the table is by adding that word mainline, that would eliminate some of the transfer of commuter bags and other things that we do today. When and where so directed, although the work we do today in some cases is when and where so directed, our position going forward is that we want to capture that work in scope. And for instance, you take catering. Today we do that in 5 locations. Our position at the table is we keep that work in those 5 locations. And if it's a joint operation between the IAM and TWU, then that would be an incremental headcount increase to accommodate all such aircraft in that location. Cargo work. We have listed several cities that we want to do cargo work. And And if it's not a listed city, then that work may be done by us as a when and where so directed, or by a vendor. Mail work, we listed by name the cities that we want to do the mail work. And again, that would become part of scope, and if it's not listed, it would become when and where so directed. De-icing, we've listed 20 locations, 19, I believe we own that work today. The company has offered, I believe, 5 cold weather cities, but make no bones about it. The caveat is those 5 cities would belong to association members unless the consortium or the airport took over that de-icing at a central location. In essence, you would lose that work through that process. So really, they guarantee you the work only if the consortium does not choose to have the airport authority do that work. Customary work, that's lab and water. We do that work today in approximately 35 locations. Some of that work is when and where so directed on one side, and on the other side, that work is part of their scope. And our position is we will do all that work. Aircraft movement, we've agreed to language in the fleet service, but we agree to that language if it's not in conflict with the mechanic and related agreement, so we do not cross over. And as you know, when we get into mechanic and related, we have an issue with aircraft movement and towing. So as long as it's not in conflict, they'll be able to do that. Interior cabin cleaning on through turns and RONs. We do that today in some locations. Our position at the table is wherever we do that, we will continue to do that on both sides. And most of the other language in the company's proposal, we have reached some agreements. And we'll get into the cities that we talked about in a minute. Control center and central load planning. We have a big difference of opinion. If you read the company's proposal, the amount of work those folks own is very limited. And there's about 8 bullet points that tell you, in addition, this is what they may do. And I raise that because it's awfully funny. On the American side, those folks were previous management. And when they were accreted, the company used language to try to convince the NMB that they were not part of the classic craft of fleet service. And the language we propose, that's their job duties, most of that came from their filing with the NMB. So it's awfully funny now that they're saying that it's not their work. And Andre and Mark, do you want to touch on some of the things we talked about as far as the cities and locations will do that work?
All right, so what we did was a snapshot where we captured everything that we're currently doing today. Our position was to maintain and not to lose work. So what we did was we put up a template that outlined all of the work that we do in all of the locations. And the idea is to own that work going forward. Now, words like when and where so directed systematically takes away ownership of that work. And that's what we're trying not to do. We tried to look into expanding the work because the company is growing. We wanted to grow along with the company. But by and large, the true motivation here was to not have a concessionary bargaining practice going on, which is pretty much what we're seeing. The company's doing quite well financially. We're looking at the work that's currently being done and where it could be done in other locations, and that goes back to the 16 cities. If we can get to a point where we can have some honest dialogue, because again, it's just funny how certain language can be introduced, like for instance, mainline. Mainline is being put into the language to now change the history of the prior language that we had. We see that as being a problem because in one of the sessions, the question was asked, what was the intention of introducing this language? And the company wanted to have the flexibility to have relief if they needed it. So I, for one, have extreme difficulties because if you do not capture everything that you mean and say exactly what you mean and capture it in the language, then it's subject to be open-ended and for debate later. So by and large, the language that we're presenting to the company is to show that we have ownership in these locations that we're currently working in. And we don't want to relinquish that ownership.
Mark, you have anything to add on the scope or classifications from the fleet side?
I just add a few things. Tom, you and Andre hit almost on everything, but just caution our brothers and sisters out there that's read the company's proposal. While we have a proposal on the table that would try to increase our work as the company grows, I would just ask everybody to look at the company's proposal, paragraph F, where, in their proposal, it states that the cities that we currently operate in, that we do not have our people on the ground are working at, they can continue to contract that out, and not only continue to contract that out, also any news stations that come online as of the day of the agreement, any of the news stations could be contracted out as the company determines. So whether it's cargo, lab and water, catering, de-icing, mail, or news stations, there's no way you can look at the company's proposal and not say that this is concessionary on the fleet service side.
Okay, and the next open item is compensation. Can you talk about compensation?
Yeah, on compensation, we'll get into this on all the classifications, but if you recall back in 16, when the midterm wage adjustment was made, for the fleet service folks, since United had just had a contract, fleet service was compared to their competitor, which was United plus 1%. That's how they came out of the midterm wage adjustment, whereas some of the other groups were compared to Delta plus 3% because there was no contracts in place on United at the time. Right now, the last discussion on compensation for fleet service involved the Delta plus 3% model, which they've been preaching. Our view on compensation is that's wide open until we resolve the outstanding issue of profit sharing on Delta or the other airlines. Our compensation proposal for fleet would be more than the Delta plus 3 to compensate for that difference.
Okay, and the next open item would be vacations.
Vacations will be a common issue across all of the contracts.
Before we move off fleet, is there anything else that we need to touch on fleet service?
Part-time ratio. So the company is looking at putting a proposal across the table that captures 40% of the workers that we have on the ground. Now, we wanted to say that it is 40% of full-time, and that therefore becomes a better ratio that we can deal with, that we can accommodate. We actually are giving up the caps that we have in certain locations that we have throughout the system today, and this would then better give us some bit of control of how many folks absent of this cap that can be brought in at the part-time level.